At Thanksgiving dinner, my brother stood up and announced, "We voted and you're not family anymore." Everyone cheered. I laughed softly and said, "Then I guess you won't need this." I placed a thick folder on the table. The moment he opened it, his face turned ashen and he started screaming. The clinking of silverware against porcelain used to mean warmth. Last night, it just sounded like ice. My family has always treated me like an outsider. I was the son who didn't go into the family real estate business. I was the one who worked quietly in corporate law, the one they called when they needed contracts reviewed for free, but forgot to invite to Sunday dinners. My brother Julian was the golden child. Louder, brasher, and completely parasitic. For 3 years, he's been running our aging parents' estate, supposedly managing their properties and securing everyone's future. I knew he was skimming off the top. What he didn't know was that I had spent the last 6 months quietly digging into the digital ledger. The Thanksgiving table was packed, 12 people, turkey, wine, and a suffocating layer of tension. I sat near the end, ignored as usual, while Julian held court at the head of the table. Halfway through the main course, Julian tapped his wine glass with a knife. The ringing sound silenced the room. He stood up, smoothing his tailored suit jacket, looking at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Before we do toasts, there's a family matter we need to address," Julian said, his voice booming. He looked around the room, locking eyes with my parents, who nodded solemnly. Then he looked at me. "We voted and you're not family anymore." The silence lasted for one heartbeat. Then my sister laughed. My cousins joined in. Even my mother offered a tight, approving smile. They thought it was a brilliant power move. They thought they were finally cutting the dead weight. Julian puffed out his chest, waiting for me to beg, cry, or storm out. I didn't do any of that. I laughed softly. It was a quiet, genuine sound that cut straight through their cheering. The laughter died down instantly. They weren't expecting me to be amused. "Then I guess you won't need this," I said calmly. I reached into my briefcase beside my chair and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I slid it across the mahogany table. It hit the gravy boat with a dull thud right in front of Julian. Julian sneered, glancing down at it. "What is this, a bill for your therapy?" "Open it," I whispered. My voice lacked anger. It was entirely cold, devoid of any emotion. Julian rolled his eyes and flicked the metal tabs open. He pulled out the top stack of documents. The moment he read the first page, the color drained completely from his skin. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a hollow, slack-jawed expression. His hands began to visibly tremble, rustling the paper. "What is it, Julian?" my father asked, leaning forward, his brow furrowed. Julian didn't answer. He flipped to the next page, then the next. His eyes darted wildly across the text. The folder contained every single bank statement, forged signature, and fraudulent wire transfer Julian had executed over the past 3 years. He hadn't just skimmed the estate. He had leveraged our parents' primary home and liquidated their retirement accounts into a shell company to fund his failing side ventures. He had completely ruined them. And because they had signed over power of attorney to him blindly, they were financially decimated. But that wasn't the best part. The final section of the folder contained a binding, notarized document. They had all signed 2 years ago during a corporate restructuring of the family assets, a clause I had subtly inserted, which stated that any member legally severed or voted out of the family entity immediately forfeited all shared liabilities, but retained sole ownership of the primary commercial deed. By voting me out publicly tonight, they had legally executed the trigger clause. I owned the land their entire business sat on. They owned nothing but Julian's massive, crushing debt. "No," Julian whispered. Then he looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot, his face completely ashen. "No, you bastard. You set me up." He started screaming. It was a guttural, unhinged sound that echoed off the dining room walls. He slammed his fist on the table, knocking over wine glasses, red liquid pooling like blood across the white tablecloth. "You ruined us. Mom, Dad, he's taking everything." My parents panicked, grabbing the papers from his shaking hands. The table erupted into pure chaos, tears, shouting, and desperate demands for explanations. I stood up slowly, buttoning my coat. I looked at the ruined dinner, then at my brother, who was now weeping openly. "You voted me out," I said, my voice deadpan. "So, as a stranger, I'm giving you 30 days to vacate my property. Happy Thanksgiving." I walked out into the crisp autumn night, leaving the screaming behind me.